Okay, so this time around we want to get this form when we submit it with all proper data, so anything that will pass validation is suitable for right now. We don't want it to display this blank screen. We want it to display a reservation summary. So that shows the user what they registered for. We're giving them a confirmation, basically. And again, we don't have enough information on the form right now. We don't know what room they're in. We're not bothering to display the dates of their reservation, but we'll get to that. Right now, we're just going to get things up and running as a kind of wireframe. So the first thing I'm going to need, obviously, is somewhere under my templates, I'm going to create a new template. And I will call that new file, not a Go file. I will call it reservation summary.page.tmpl. And this is just going to be a summary page. So I can go to the About page, for example, and just copy everything in there to give it a kind of starter. So we're going to have information displayed. And we want a title. So let's give this title we'll push the title down a little bit by giving it a class of MT5. That's one of the Bootstrap built-in classes that pushes it down from the top of the page so it's not quite so crowded. And we'll just call the title Reservation Summary. All right. Now, underneath that, I'm going to put an HR, just a nice line. And then I'm going to create a table, which you haven't done yet. You may have done it, but some of you may not have done it. So let's build a table. And a table is built just using standard HTML like this. It's a table, and I'm going to use one of the classes, or some of the classes, built into Bootstrap to make it a little prettier. So Bootstrap's default class for table is, not surprisingly, called table. So that'll apply default Bootstrap styling to it. And then I'll make it striped, just so it's easier to read. Table striped. Okay. So there is a table tag. Now a table typically has a head. Those would be column headings at the top of the table. But I'm going to leave an empty one in there because I don't really need it. I'll put it in just because it's nice to have it. And then it has a body, which is called tbody. And inside of that, you have rows and columns. And we're going to have a row, so we'll make one row. And inside of that, we'll make a column inside of that row, td. And we'll give it a label, name. And we don't actually know how to get the name here yet, but we're going to put it in a column right beside it. And then I'm going to copy this and paste it for the other three pieces of data. So we're going to have their arrival, which we don't know yet. We're going to have their departure, which we don't know yet. We're going to have their email, which we do know. And we're going to have their phone. So we'll put arrival and departure and email and phone. Okay, so there is enough information for us right now. We'll be able to display some of the content that we have from our posted form, and we're going to populate this with that information, with the bits we know right now. We don't know arrival and departure, but we're going to get there eventually, so I'll put them in as placeholders. Great, so I've created this template. Now I need a handler to display that template. So let's go to our handlers, and let's just create one called, we'll put it right at the bottom. I'll call it func, and again, it's going to be linked to our receiver for our repository. And I'll call it, reservation summary. And because it's a handler, it has to take a writer, http.response-writer. And it has to take a pointer to an http.request. There, we have a handler now. So let's go to our routes file and create a route for that. That's under command web routes. So we'll put this near the reservation stuff. Right here is as good a place as any, and it will be a get request / reservation summary, and it will point to our handlers in our repository repo.reservation summary. There. So now we have a route to it. That's great. So let's go back to our handler for a minute and think about how we're going to get from, well, back to routes, how we're going to get from this post of search availability to this get of reservation summary. So in other words, they're posting the form here, which is post availability. Not post availability, wrong one. Forms, routes. From here, so reservation summary doesn't belong here. Let's get it out of there and put it down here where we're making a reservation. So in other words, Let's try this again. We're going from post reservation and we want to get to reservation summary. So let's go to post reservation and see what we're doing. So we're parsing the form, we're building our reservation object, we're then creating a form validator, we're making sure that we get the required fields, that we have the minimum length, that an email is actually an email. If it's not valid, we take them back. So here's the part where we want to do something. We actually want to take them to that reservation summary page. So how are we going to do that? Well, first of all, we need to pass this information that we're storing up here over to our reservation summary page. So how are we going to do that? Well, here's a great opportunity to use our session. So far, we haven't really done anything with the session other than set it up. So what we're going to do is throw that object, that variable reservation, right into the session. And then when we get to the reservation summary page, we're going to pull that value out of the session and send it to the template and display the information. So how do we get something into the session? Well, we have this nice receiver called repository right up here. We can use that. M dot, and what we have stored inside of that is a lot of stuff. You can see it all listed here right now. So what we want is our session. And where do we store that? Well, we store that in app. And then we have our session. And then we can just put into that session. And as you can see right here, it requires a context, which we have from our variable R, our response writer, the key we want to call that thing in the session, which can be whatever we want, and the value we want to store. So we will put into r.context, which we get right out of our response writer, and we'll call this reservation because it's a reservation, and the value will be that variable reservation. And you think that might be enough, and you would be wrong. We need to tell our application about the kinds of things we're going to store into the session. The primitives like int and string, we already can store those. That's built right into the sessions package. But we actually need to go over to our application main, right here, main.go, and we need to add something here. We need to tell our application that we're going to store certain kinds of values in the session. So, as I said, we can store primitives. So what am I going to put in the session? We can store primitives, but we need to actually tell our application about more complex types, structs that we've defined ourselves. And we want to store in the reservation model. Now, the syntax to do that sounds a little odd. It's GOB, G-O-B, which is built right into the standard library, and the method we want is register. And register just takes a value, a type of interface, anything we want to store in our session. And what we want to store is a models.reservation. There. Now that I've done that, I can actually store values in the session. So back in our handlers, here we've stored the value in the session. And what do we want to do next? Well, we could just redisplay the form, but why am I putting this information in the session at all? Or we could just redisplay a page, but we actually want to do a redirect. And the reason we want to do that is pretty straightforward. We don't want people to accidentally submit the form twice. So what we do, and this is good standard practice, anytime you receive a post request, you should direct your users to another page with an HTTP redirect. And the syntax is right in the standard library, http.redirect, and it requires a few parameters. The first one is a response writer. Well, we have that, it's W. The second one is a pointer to a request. We have that, it's R. The URL we want to go to is just the direction or where we actually want to redirect the people. And where we want to redirect them to is /reservation summary, the URL we set up a little while ago. And then we need to send a status code. And a good one to use when you're redirecting someone like this is status cother. So http.status cother. And you can see right in my preview, that's actually response code 303. And that's the perfect one for what we're doing. So we'll choose that one, status cother. And that's a redirect. So this should work. Now what's missing, of course, is down here in our reservation summary, we're not showing that page at all. So I'm just going to show that page and make no changes to it just to make sure everything works. So I'll just copy, try it again, copy this, paste it here, and put in the right template, which is reservation summary.page.tmpl. All right, so let's stop our application if it's running, and it is. Clear, run, go run command web star.go. It's now starting, so let's go to our web browser. So here we are on the web browser. Let's make sure that everything works for validation. It does. And now let's populate this with useful information. AAA, BBB, c@c.com, and some phone number. And I'll make the reservation. And what we should see is our make reservation or our reservation summary page with nothing populated, because we haven't actually done anything with the value we're pulling out of the session. All right, that looks good. So let's go back to our code, and now let's actually pull the information out of the session. So how do we get that thing we stored up here? Here we put in the session, we put an attribute named reservation that holds our reservation, which is this right here. And we need to get it out of the session. Unfortunately, that's not too hard. So let's create a variable, reservation. And I'm going to create another one, okay. And you'll see why in a minute. And now I'm going to get this out of the session. So I go to my my pointer to a repository, and then app, and then session, and then get. And get requires a few parameters. Our context, we know how to get that, r.context, and the name of what we want to get, which we called reservation. Now, that's not enough, because the session, although it's storing a reservation for us, it has no idea what type that is. So we need to type assert, and that's where the OK that I have at the beginning of this line comes from. And we type assert it to a models.reservation. Now, if this works, if it manages to find something called reservation in the session, and it manages to assert it to type models.reservation, this OK will be true. Otherwise, it's false. So we need to check to make sure that we actually got it. If not OK. In other words, if we didn't get it out of the session the way we're supposed to, we should do something. So for now, we're going to go log.println and cannot get item from session. We'll change this in a while and we'll return because we don't want to go any further. Otherwise, we want to do something with this reservation that we successfully pulled out of the session. And we're going to pass that as template data. And we already know we have a type in our template data called data, and it holds anything at all. So let's create a map, and we'll call it data equals make map string interface, which is the type we're using for the data type. And we'll just put our reservation in there. Data reservation, that's the key we'll use to look it up, is equal to reservation. And we'll pass that here, data. Now that should work. Let's go over to our reservation summary page, and at the very top of the block named content, and it has to be within the same block, we're going to create a variable called res, and we'll pull that out of our data variable that's passed to this template. And that's a map, so we look up things in a map in Golang templates by using index. The map we want to look it up in, which is called .data. Remember, the dot says it's something we're pulling out of our template data. And then what's the key? Reservation. Now if this works, I should be able to come down to this part of my table, the name, and actually print that out. res.firstname. Let's just do that and nothing else. So we'll stop our application, see if it compiles. It does. Let's go back to our web browser, go back to this screen, and we'll just make sure the page is clean. We'll reload it and put some data in there. So Trevor, that's the only one I'm using. I'll put Solar in there too. It's not going to do anything with that except store it. We're never going to see it. But if this works, I should see my first name on the reservation summary page. Oh, got to give it an email. c@c.com. And there it is, Trevor. Perfect. So if I come back here now, I can put the last name in. res.lastname, and it has to be case sensitive. You have to match exactly what it's called in the model. We don't know arrival, we don't know departure, we do know the email. So res.email, and we also know the phone. res.phone. So let's save this, and I shouldn't have to restart the application because I just made a change to the template, but I'll go back. I'll make sure I'm on the make reservation page, and the form is now being populated. Trevor Solar, me at here.com, and my phone number is 555-555-5555. And let's see what happens. And there it is. Everything, 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces of data all displayed. Now this is a good start. There's a couple of other things I want to do though. So let's go back to our code and look at it. And we'll do these in the next lecture, not in this one. So under handlers, when I actually handle the post of make reservation, which is right here, that's okay. I parse the form, I create my reservation, I do my valid testing, good, and we go over to the reservation summary page, no problem. So we now get redirected to reservation summary. This is the part I'm interested in. What if someone somehow goes to our site /reservation-summary without making a reservation? At that point, this variable will not be valid. This will be false because it can't pull anything out of the session. What I'm doing right now is effectively showing a blank page. If I go to this page without a reservation in the session, it just writes to my log file, which is just the terminal in our case, returns a blank screen, and it appears that nothing happened. What we should do is redirect them somewhere else on the page and actually give them a message, an error message somehow. And we're going to do that. We're going to redirect them to the home page, and we'll use Noti to display an error message. So we'll take care of that in the next lecture, and then we'll move on probably to testing.